When I was growing up as a young boy, I had some self-esteem issues. I looked at our home, the circumstances in which I was growing up, having lost our mother when I was only 6 years old. I never grew up with a mother. I looked at the economic circumstances that were surrounding us, and they were quite humble. I compared myself with our neighbors, and I felt we were falling short. I looked at my physique, my body morphology, and I could tell I would fall short of the worldly standard of a 6 feet dark, tall, handsome man that the world celebrated. In my school, when I was in primary school, I was hardly doing very well, especially in the lower classes. I was not among the tops, and I struggled with self-esteem issues. But as I grew up, I became more enlightened, and I discovered your identity is not your external circumstances. It's not about your body morphology, so to say. It's not about the living conditions. It's not about who you are relative to other people. Your identity is more than the circumstances of your life. Your identity is more than your body morphology, how you look like, your complexion, your height, your structure, your dental formula. Your identity is much more than that. And yet there are many people who struggle with identity because they fall short of the worldly standards. They feel like they are too dark or too light. They feel like they are too tall or too short. They simply feel they don't conform to the worldly standards of identity. And they suffer from low self-esteem. Welcome to the Wholesome Living, and we continue with our series on identity. Today we discuss what is identity. What are the dimensions of identity? And let alone, how do you cultivate, how do you discover your true identity? I'm your host, James Carroll. It's good to have you on board. Let's ask ourselves, what is your identity? Because for you to live a wholesome life, for you to have a wholesome life, you must cultivate the right sense of identity. Someone said that it's St. Augustine who said, our heart is restless until we find our true identity in Christ. We are made for Christ, we are made for God, but our heart is restless until we find our true identity. And many of the problems of humanity owe their source to who we are, to the question of the identity. Who do you think you are? What is your identity? And unless we cultivate the right sense of identity, we will not be true to ourselves. And when we are not true to ourselves, we try to imitate other people. And imitation is limitation. No one else can be better than you. And therefore, we need to cultivate our right sense of identity and be the best versions of ourselves. We are so uniquely, fearfully, and wonderfully made that no one can defeat us at being ourselves. Nobody can learn the race of our lives. So I'm encouraging you, be you and be the best version of yourself. So what is identity? Who and whose am I? It is the way we see ourselves. Identity is the way we see ourselves. How do you see yourselves? It's the way we perceive who we are. What do you think you are? How do you perceive yourself? It's our sense of self and worth, a person's sense of worth and ourselves. We treat ourselves the way we see or perceive ourselves. If you perceive yourself wrongly, you treat yourself wrongly. If you perceive yourself rightly or correctly, you treat yourself correctly. It depends on the lens through which you see your identity. And generally, we can see ourselves through two lenses. One, the physical lens. That's the worldly lens. that we define ourselves from what we can see. That unless you measure up to certain standards of body morphology, you feel you're not handsome enough or beautiful enough, because that's the worldly standards, that's the physical lens, what we can see. That unless you are economically empowered, there are symbols of success in your life, there are symbols of financial success in your life, then you feel poor about yourself. That's a physical lens that limits us. Because your identity is not just the material that we see, it's more than that. Then the other lens is a spiritual lens, where you see yourself through the spiritual lens. Who does your Creator say you are? Who does your spiritual father say you are? As opposed to other voices. A story is told of a young man who was lame. He was a son of a king. But he had a limb. And so, the king who succeeded his father called him, and he wanted to show him some favor out of his loyalty to his father, who was a king. And when this man was called, his name is Mephibosheth, who was actually King Saul's son. Jonathan, when he was called by King David, and King David told him, I want to show you some favor because of your dad. This guy described himself in a way that showed he didn't know his true identity. As recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 8, he said, who am I, your servant, a dead dog that you want to show some favor? He was calling himself a dead dog. And that's how some people feel about themselves, because they don't define themselves properly. When 12 spies went to spy the land, the promised land, and they looked at the people, the Canaanites, who were tall, they looked like giants. When they came back, they gave a report and said, we look like grasshoppers in their eyes. Why? They defined themselves through the physical lens of what they can say, what they could see. And there are many people who define themselves through the physical lens. But another story is told in the Bible of a man who was just a shepherd who dared to fight with a seasoned soldier, Goliath. And Goliath stood tall with his regalia as a military man. But David, who was just a mere shepherd boy, did not look at him from the physical lens. He looked at himself, defined himself from a spiritual lens. And when Goliath mocked him, who do you think I am that you can come with a sling? David defined himself differently. He saw himself as a servant of God, and no wonder he conquered Goliath. That's what happens when you cultivate the true identity of who you are in God. But as long as we don't define ourselves and we let other people define us, we shall misdefine ourselves and we shall lack the true identity. What are the various dimensions of identity? There could be 5 critical dimensions of identity. The first one is spiritual identity. That you've got to recognize you are a spirit that has a soul and lives in a body. I'm going to repeat that because that is very, very important. And many people think that they are who they look they are, that they're just mere bodies. We are a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. So we are spiritual beings. Essentially, that is who we are. That's the core of our being. Secondly, psychological identity. That has to do with your emotional and mental identity. Who you are mentally and emotionally. That's psychological identity. Then there's social identity. Who you are in the eyes of people. What is your social standing? How do you relate with people? Fourthly, your physical identity. That has to do with who you are physically. That gives us some sense of identity. And last but not least, career or occupational identity. What is it that you do? Those are the 5 dimensions of identity: spiritual identity, physical identity, psychological identity, career identity. Yes. Thank you for tuning to this program. My name is James Crow. Thank you for watching. God bless you.